She tugged his sleeve and whispered, "My mommy's sorry she's late." He almost smiled, until she added, "She said he found us again." His blood ran cold as he followed her trembling gaze, straight to the man at the bar who'd been watching them the whole time. Before we dive in, where are you watching from, and what kind of story do you want to see next? Drop it in the comments. And if stories like this pull you in and don't let go, go ahead, hit subscribe. I have another powerful one coming tomorrow. Now, let's get into the story. The evening lights of Lantern Cafe glowed like amber jewels against the darkening cityscape as David Ward sat alone at a corner table, checking his watch for the fourth time in 15 minutes. At 36, he had been on enough blind dates to recognize the telltale signs of being stood up, and this was beginning to look like a textbook case. His colleague from the architectural firm had set this up, insisting that David needed to stop hiding behind blueprints and building models and actually meet someone. The woman, Alexandra Buckley, was described as intelligent, independent, and exactly the kind of challenge you need. But it was now 30 minutes past their agreed meeting time, and the chair across from him remained conspicuously empty. David was reaching for his coat, resignation settling over him like familiar weight, when he noticed a small figure weaving purposefully between the tables. A little girl, no more than 4 years old, with blonde curls bouncing against her yellow floral dress. She moved with the focused determination of someone on an important mission, navigating the cafe crowd until she stood directly beside his table. "Excuse me," the child said with careful politeness, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Mr. David?" David blinked, caught completely off guard. Yes. Yes, I am." He glanced around, looking for a parent. "And who are you?" "I'm Edna," the girl said, leaning in closer as if sharing a secret. "My mommy sent me to find you. She's really, really sorry she's late." David felt his irritation dissolve instantly, replaced by surprise and an odd sort of concern. "Your mommy sent you in by yourself to find me?" Edna nodded solemnly. "She showed me your picture on her phone, so I'd know it was you. She said you'd be at the table by the window with the candle." She paused, then added with quiet urgency, "And she said not to let the man in the gray jacket see you." The words hit David like ice water. His eyes snapped up, scanning the cafe with sudden alertness. There, by the front window, a man in a gray jacket sat with a newspaper, but his eyes weren't on the pages. They were watching the entrance, watching the tables, watching. "What man?" David asked carefully, his voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through him. Edna climbed into the chair across from him with some effort, and David found himself automatically shifting the candle aside to give her room. Once settled, she folded her small hands on the table and looked at him with eyes that seemed far too observant for her age, clear, intelligent, worried. "The man who followed us," Edna said simply. "Mommy doesn't think I notice, but I always notice." Before David could process this, before he could ask any of the dozen questions suddenly flooding his mind, a woman rushed to their table, breathless, flushed, and radiating barely contained panic beneath a forced smile. She was striking, probably in her early 30s, with shoulder-length dark blonde hair and eyes that matched her daughter's, the same shade of cautious blue. But it was the tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze flickered toward the windows, the slight tremor in her hands that David noticed most. "Edna," the woman said, her voice tight with controlled fear disguised as motherly exasperation. "I told you to wait by the door, sweetheart. Not to come find him alone." She turned to David, and he watched her assemble a mask of normalcy that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Alexandra. This is my daughter, Edna, who apparently has her own ideas about following instructions." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I am so sorry I'm late. Parking was absolutely impossible, and then I couldn't get the meter to work, and by the time I got inside—" "It's fine," David interrupted gently, his architect's mind already cataloging exits, sight lines, the position of the man in gray. Edna was very polite. "She delivered your message perfectly." He gestured to the seat beside her daughter. "Please sit down." Alexandra hesitated, her eyes meeting his for just a moment. And in that moment, David saw it clearly: terror, exhaustion, and something else. A silent plea. She sat, positioning herself so Edna was between them rather than across from David, her body angled protectively. "I should have been honest when we agreed to meet," Alexandra said, her voice dropping to something more genuine, more desperate. "I should have told you that I have a daughter. I should have told you that this isn't really. I mean, I understand completely if you want to leave." "Why would I want to leave?" David asked, though he was beginning to understand that this question meant something entirely different than the one in a normal first date. Alexandra's eyes glistened. "Because most men do when things get complicated." She glanced at Edna, then back to David. And this is about to get very complicated. David looked at Edna, who was watching this exchange with an intensity that broke his heart. This child who'd had to deliver warnings about men in gray jackets, who'd been sent alone to find a stranger because her mother was too afraid to walk through a cafe entrance. Then he looked at Alexandra, this woman who was clearly running from something, who'd shown up to what should have been a safe, boring blind date carrying more than just the usual first date nerves. And David Ward, who had spent the last 10 years of his life designing safe spaces, who understood better than most what fear looked like when it was trying to hide behind polite smiles, made a decision. He reached across the table slowly, deliberately, and picked up the menu. Then we should probably order, he said calmly. It's going to be harder to have a conversation if they kick us out for taking up a table without ordering anything. Alexandra's breath caught. You're staying? I'm staying, David confirmed. And then, in a lower voice meant only for her, he added, and I'm going to need you to tell me about the man in the gray jacket. But first, he glanced at Edna with a gentle smile. Does someone want to help me decide if I should get the pasta or the chicken? What David didn't tell Alexandra in that moment, what he couldn't tell her yet, was that he recognized the language of fear she carried, the way she positioned herself, the hypervigilance in her eyes. He'd seen it before in the faces of people he'd designed buildings for, people who needed to disappear, people who needed walls between themselves and the things that hunted them. Because before David Ward became just an architect, before he spent his days designing office buildings and luxury condominiums, he'd been someone else entirely. Someone who understood that sometimes the most important blueprints weren't for buildings, they were for survival. And as Edna smiled at him over the flickering candlelight, as Alexandra's shoulders dropped just slightly in relief, David realized that this blind date, this strange, terrifying, impossible meeting, might be exactly what it appeared to be. Not a coincidence, but a collision of two people who desperately needed to be found. The waiter arrived with practiced efficiency, and David ordered for all three of them, keeping his choices simple, quick, things that could be abandoned if they needed to leave in a hurry. Alexandra noticed. He could see it in the slight widening of her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed then relaxed, as if his preparedness both comforted and frightened her. So, David said once the waiter departed, keeping his tone deliberately casual, what do you do, Alexandra? She took a sip of water, and he watched her throat work around the swallow. I'm in consulting, she said. The words came out too rehearsed, too careful. Behavioral analysis, actually. For corporations mostly. Helping them understand employee dynamics, identify potential issues before they become problems. That sounds fascinating, David replied, playing along with the script she'd prepared. How long have you been doing that? About 6 months. Her fingers twisted the napkin in her lap. Before that, I worked for a different firm. Government contracts, mostly. The hesitation before government contracts was so slight most people would have missed it. David didn't miss it. He also didn't miss the way her eyes flickered toward the window where the man in gray had been sitting, and found the chair empty. Mommy, can I draw? Edna asked, already reaching for the crayons the waiter had left. Of course, sweetheart. Alexandra's voice softened when she spoke to her daughter, the tension momentarily breaking. She spread a paper napkin flat on the table, and Edna immediately began sketching with intense concentration. With Edna occupied, an uncomfortable silence settled between the adults. David studied Alexandra more carefully now. The dark circles beneath expertly applied concealer, the way she held her body rigid as if ready to bolt, the constant monitoring of exits and entrances. These weren't the nerves of a first date. This was survival mode. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I'm fine, she said quickly. Too quickly. Just tired. Single parenthood, you know? It's exhausting. But beneath the table, where Edna couldn't see, David noticed Alexandra's hand trembling violently against her thigh. She caught him looking and immediately moved her hand to her lap, tucking it out of sight. David had seen that tremor before. In the faces of witnesses who'd needed safe houses. In people who'd been running so long they'd forgotten what safety felt like. Listen, he started, lowering his voice. If you need. I'll be right back, Alexandra interrupted, her phone suddenly in her hand though David hadn't heard it ring. I need to take this. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Edna, stay with Mr. David, okay? I'll just be a minute. She hurried toward the back hallway where the restrooms were, phone pressed to her ear, leaving her purse hanging on the chair. David watched her disappear around the corner, then glanced down at Edna, who was drawing what appeared to be a house, complete with multiple locks on the door. Your mommy seems worried, David said gently. She's always worried now, Edna replied without looking up. Ever since we left our old house. Before David could ask more, Alexandra's purse tilted precariously on the chair, tipping forward. Instinctively, he reached to steady it, and a manila folder slipped out, spilling partially open on the floor. David bent to retrieve it, intending to simply tuck it back. But his eyes caught the contents spread before him, and his blood went cold. Blurred surveillance photographs, parking garages, street corners, the entrance to what looked like a government building. In several, a man's face was circled in red marker. Not the man in gray. Someone else. Someone whose face carried authority, calculation. Beneath the photos, a laminated badge ID. Federal. Alexandra Buckley's photo, but a different last name, Alexandra Reeves. The agency designation made his stomach drop, Behavioral Analysis Unit. And tucked between the pages, a handwritten note on official letterhead, the handwriting sharp and urgent. Do not trust anyone from the unit. They've been compromised. Get out. Get the evidence somewhere safe. Protect your daughter. M. David's hands moved automatically, gathering the papers, sliding them back into the folder and into her purse. His mind raced through implications, connections, the kind of danger that came with betrayal at the federal level. When he looked up, Alexandra was walking back toward the table, but something had changed in her face. The color had drained from her cheeks. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking past him, toward the entrance. David followed her gaze and felt his pulse spike. The man in the gray jacket was gone. But in his place, another man had entered mid-40s, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a nondescript navy jacket. He carried a newspaper under his arm and settled into a booth near the front, spreading the paper open with theatrical casualness. But David, who'd spent years studying architectural sight lines and security positions, recognized immediately what he was witnessing, a surveillance rotation. The gray jacket had been relieved. This was someone new taking over the watch. Alexandra reached the table, and her eyes met David's. In that moment, all pretense shattered. She knew he'd seen the folder. He knew she was in danger. And they both knew they were being watched. We should go, she whispered, reaching for Edna. No, David said quietly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Running makes you memorable. We need to act normal. He's a professional, Alexandra breathed, her voice barely audible. He'll follow us. David's mind worked through scenarios with the cold precision he'd cultivated over years of designing escape routes and safe spaces. The cafe had 3 exits: front entrance where the new watcher sat, kitchen service door that would be locked from outside, and a side emergency exit that would trigger an alarm. But there was also the principle he'd learned long ago. The best way to disappear wasn't to run. It was to become unremarkable, forgettable, exactly what you appeared to be. He didn't know why he did what he did next. Didn't know why this woman and her daughter had become his responsibility in the span of 45 minutes. But instinct, something deeper than logic, took over. David reached across the table slowly, deliberately, and placed his hand over Alexandra's trembling fingers. To anyone watching, it would look like an intimate gesture, a first date going well. If you're in trouble, he said, his voice low and calm, his eyes locked on hers, stay calm and follow my lead. What do you think David's planning? And who do you think is behind all this? Leave your theories in the comments below. Alexandra's fingers tightened beneath his hand, not pulling away, but gripping like a lifeline. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Trust, maybe. Or proof that he wasn't another mistake in a series of fatal errors. Why are you helping us? She whispered. I don't know yet, David admitted, but we can figure that out later. Right now, we need to move without making it obvious we're moving. He released her hand and raised his arm casually, catching the waiter's attention. The young man approached with practiced efficiency, and David pulled out his wallet with deliberate slowness. Actually, something's come up, David said, projecting apologetic embarrassment. Work emergency, you know how it is. Could we get the check? And maybe box up whatever we ordered to go. The waiter's face showed polite understanding. Of course, sir. Give me just a moment. As the waiter departed, David leaned toward Alexandra, his voice barely a murmur. When he comes back, I'm going to make a show of paying. Use that time to get Edna ready. We're going to walk toward the restrooms like we're freshening up before we leave. But we're taking the kitchen exit. They'll follow. Not if they think we're coming back out front. David's eyes flicked toward the man with the newspaper. He's positioned to watch the entrance, not the service corridors. We'll have maybe 90 seconds before he realizes we're gone. Alexandra nodded once, sharp and decisive. Whatever fear she carried, she understood tactics. The waiter returned with the check. David made a production of it, counting bills, asking about the tip, buying precious seconds. Alexandra wiped Edna's hands with a napkin, gathering crayons with the unhurried movements of a mother ready to leave, but in no particular rush. "Ready?" David asked, standing and offering his hand to Edna. The little girl took it without hesitation, and something in David's chest tightened at her immediate trust. They walked toward the back hallway, a man, a woman, a child, looking like any other family finishing their meal. David felt the weight of unseen eyes on his back, but didn't turn around. The hallway opened to the restrooms on the left, kitchen entrance on the right. Without breaking stride, David pushed through the kitchen door. "Hey, you can't." A line cook started, but David was already moving, guiding Alexandra and Edna past steel counters and hanging pots with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Because he did. His firm had consulted on the cafe's renovation 3 years ago. He'd walked these service corridors a dozen times. The emergency exit loomed ahead, the kind with a push bar that would trigger an alarm if opened improperly. But David had designed the override system. His fingers found the recessed magnetic lock, pressed the code he'd memorized from the blueprints. The door opened silently into a narrow alley thick with the smell of garbage and rain. "Go," David urged, and they slipped into the darkness. The alley opened onto a side street, bustling with evening pedestrians. They'd made it 30 yards before Alexandra stopped abruptly, turning on him with sudden intensity. "I can handle this," she said, breathing hard. "You don't need to. I appreciate what you did back there, but you should go. This isn't your problem." "You're being followed by federal agents," David said flatly. "Or people who used to be federal agents. Either way, that's not something you handle on your own." "How do you?" Alexandra's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Someone who recognizes surveillance rotations when he sees them." David crossed his arms. "I used to consult for law enforcement. Architectural design for secure facilities. Safe houses, mostly. I know what running looks like, Alexandra. And I know you can't keep doing it alone." Something broke in her expression, relief and terror mixing into exhaustion. She glanced down at Edna, who was watching them both with worried eyes, then back to David. "Behavioral Analysis Division," she said quietly, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I worked for them for 7 years. 6 months ago, I was assigned to profile a suspect, but the suspect wasn't external. It was someone within our department. Someone high up. What did you find?" "Enough to know he was dirty. Trafficking, evidence tampering, witness manipulation." Her voice dropped. "I reported it through proper channels. Then my supervisor, the one I reported to, disappeared. And the suspect started sending me messages, letting me know he was watching Edna, letting me know that accidents could happen to little girls." David's jaw tightened. "So you ran." "I took what evidence I could and got out." Alexandra's hands trembled again. "But they're not going to let it go. They can't. What I have could destroy careers, expose an entire network." "The flash drive," David said, remembering the note in her folder. "That's what M wanted you to protect." Alexandra looked startled. "You saw. How much did you see?" "Enough." David rubbed his face, thinking through angles and options with the clinical detachment that came from years of strategic planning. "Wait, Edna's coat. Did she have one?" "Yes, why?" Alexandra's face went white. "Oh God, I left it on the chair." "We need to go back," David said. "Are you insane? They're watching. Which means they're watching the exits, not the interior. And if there's anything in those pockets." "Her insulin pen," Alexandra breathed. "She's diabetic. It's in the pocket." David was already moving. "Stay here. I'll be 3 minutes." He retraced their path, slipping back through the kitchen entrance with the same quiet authority. The cafe's main room buzzed with evening dinner service, louder now, more crowded. Perfect cover. Their table had been cleared but not yet reset. David approached it from an angle that kept his face turned away from the front entrance where newspaperman still sat. He grabbed the small purple jacket from the chair back, but as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. The candle holder. Its brass base sat slightly askew on the table, and etched into the wood beneath it, fresh scratches, deliberate marks, were numbers. Coordinates. David's heart hammered as he memorized them. 38.9072 degrees north, 77.0369 degrees west. He knew those coordinates. Knew them because he'd specified them himself on architectural plans 7 years ago. It was the location of a government safe house he'd designed. One that had been decommissioned and abandoned 3 years back. Someone had left him a message. When he returned to the alley, Alexandra was pacing, Edna clutched against her side. She nearly sobbed in relief when she saw the jacket. "Thank you," she whispered, immediately checking the pocket for the insulin pen. "Alexandra," David said carefully, "did you write coordinates under our table?" "What? No. Why would I?" That's the same number Mommy wrote on the mirror this morning, Edna said innocently, looking up at them both. With the lipstick. Before we left our hotel. The world seemed to tilt. Alexandra stared at her daughter, then at David, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. I didn't write anything on a mirror, Alexandra whispered. I didn't write those numbers. David pulled out his phone, typing in the coordinates. The map bloomed on his screen, a location he knew intimately, had walked through dozens of times during construction, had designed every exit and entrance and hidden compartment. Someone else did, he said quietly. And they're telling us exactly where to go. Who do you think left those coordinates? A friend trying to help, or someone setting a trap? Drop your theories below. Backhand index pointing down, and what would you do if you were David right now? David's car, a practical sedan that now felt woefully inadequate for the situation, wound through backstreets he knew by heart. Years of architectural work in the district had etched the city's skeleton into his memory. Which roads had cameras, which alleys dead-ended, which routes law enforcement favored for pursuit. He avoided them all. In the back seat, Edna had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, exhausted by adrenaline and confusion. Alexandra stared out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Talk to me, David said quietly. If we're walking into something, I need to know what we're walking into. Alexandra was silent for so long he thought she might refuse. Then, voice barely above a whisper. His name is Marcus Hale, Deputy Director of the Behavioral Analysis Division. She paused. He was my mentor. Taught me everything about profiling, about reading people, about finding patterns no one else could see. What happened? I found a pattern in him. Her laugh was bitter. Isn't that ironic? The man who taught me to see the invisible became invisible himself. For 2 years, he'd been manipulating case files, redirecting investigations, protecting a trafficking network that operated through legitimate government contracts. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. How did you figure it out? A case went wrong. A witness disappeared the night before testimony, a woman who'd been promised federal protection. I was reviewing the security protocols, trying to understand how someone got to her. Alexandra's voice cracked. And I saw Hale's signature on transfer orders. Orders that moved her from a secure facility to a secondary location. A location that didn't exist in our database. You confronted him. I went to his supervisor first. David Chun. M. from the note you saw. He was the only person I trusted. She closed her eyes. 2 days later, Chun vanished. Officially took emergency medical leave. But I knew. Hale had gotten to him somehow. So I did the only thing I could think of. I copied everything I had onto a flash drive and ran. And Hale came after you. Not directly. That's not how men like him operate. Alexandra's reflection showed hollow eyes. He framed me instead. Planted evidence that I was the one tampering with files, that I'd been taking money from the traffickers. Made me the suspect. Now every federal agency is looking for me. And the only people who know I'm innocent are either disappeared or dead. David processed this as streetlights flickered past. The evidence on your flash drive could prove everything. But it's worthless if I can't get it to someone who will actually investigate instead of arresting me on sight. She looked at him directly. That's why I can't understand why you're helping us. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. And this could destroy your life if you're caught helping a federal fugitive. Maybe that's exactly why, David said. He didn't elaborate. Wasn't sure he could explain the instinct that had taken over the moment Edna whispered her warning. Some decisions were made in the architecture of the soul, built on foundations you didn't fully understand until you tested their weight. The safe house emerged from the darkness like a memory made solid. Single story, nondescript, the kind of building that discouraged attention through sheer mundane ugliness. David had designed it that way intentionally, forgettable, functional, with exits and hiding places built into walls that looked entirely ordinary. He parked 2 blocks away, and they approached on foot. Edna had woken, walking between them with sleepy confusion. Why are we here? She asked. Just for a little while, sweetheart, Alexandra murmured. Mr. David knows a safe place. But as they reached the door, as David used the emergency override code he'd built into the lock mechanism, his instincts screamed warning. The door opened too easily. No resistance, no stiffness from disuse. Inside, the smell hit him first, stale cigarette smoke. Faint but distinct. Wait, David said, holding up his hand. He flicked on his phone's flashlight, scanning the entryway. There, muddy footprints, recent, tracking from the door toward the interior. And in the main room, a drawer hung open, its contents disturbed. Someone's been here, Alexandra breathed, pulling Edna closer. David moved through the space with methodical precision, checking corners and closets with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew every inch of the layout. The safe house had been stripped of most furnishings when decommissioned, but some items remained. An old sofa, a few chairs, a child's toy box someone had left behind. "It's clear," he said finally. "But someone was definitely here. Recently. Within the last few hours. Who would know about this place?" Alexandra asked. "Officially? It's been off the books for 3 years." David frowned. "But the people who originally commissioned it would still have the location. If Hale has access to old operational records." A sound cut him off. Small, electronic, muffled. A phone ringing. Edna's head snapped toward the toy box in the corner. "There's something in there," she said, walking toward it with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Edna, wait," Alexandra started, but the girl had already lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among dusty stuffed animals, a cell phone glowed. It rang once, then stopped. The silence that followed felt deafening. David crossed the room in 3 strides, carefully lifting the phone. It was a burner, cheap, untraceable. The kind used for operations that needed to stay off official channels. A text message lit the screen. "You shouldn't have brought him." Alexandra's sharp intake of breath told him she'd read it over his shoulder. David's mind raced through implications, calculating threats and possibilities with the cold logic that kept panic at bay. "It's a trap," Alexandra whispered. "Someone wanted us here. Someone knew we'd come. Or someone's trying to warn us away," David countered. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure which possibility was worse. He was about to respond when Edna tugged his sleeve. "Mr. David? Why are there car lights outside?" The world seemed to stop. David moved to the window, carefully pulling back the blind just enough to see. His blood turned to ice. A car sat idling at the curb, dark, nondescript government issue. And stepping into the moonlight, adjusting his gray jacket with unhurried confidence, was the man from the cafe. He wasn't running, wasn't rushing. He moved like someone who knew his prey was cornered, like someone who had all the time in the world. Behind David, Alexandra made a small, broken sound, fear and despair mixing into something that sounded like surrender. But David's mind was already working, already calculating, because there was something the gray-jacketed man didn't know. This safe house had been designed by someone who understood that safety wasn't about walls. It was about what lay beneath them. Is this a trap or a warning? And who sent that text message, friend or foe? What do you think is hidden beneath the safe house? Drop your theories below. Backhand index pointing down. Alexandra. The voice drifted through the walls, soft and measured, almost conversational. "Alexandra Reeves. I know you're in there." David's hand shot to Alexandra's mouth before she could gasp. He felt her trembling against his palm, felt Edna's small body pressed between them in the darkness. "Listen carefully," David whispered, his lips against Alexandra's ear. "Kitchen. Far corner. There's a panel in the floor. Looks like regular tile, but it lifts. Crawl space underneath. Take Edna and get down there. Don't make a sound. What are you? Trust me." He pulled back, meeting her eyes in the dim light. "I designed this place. I know things he doesn't." The voice came again, closer now. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk. Make this easy on yourself. Easy on your daughter." The mention of Edna made Alexandra's fear crystallize into something sharper. She grabbed David's arm. "He'll kill you. He'll try to get information first." David guided them toward the kitchen. That buys time. The kitchen was small, functional, and contained the escape route David had insisted on during construction. Emergency egress concealed as ordinary flooring. His fingers found the edge of the panel, pressing the hidden release. It lifted silently, revealing a shallow crawl space that dropped into a narrow tunnel. "It connects to the basement next door," David whispered. "Condemned building. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, go. Don't wait for me." "David." 10 minutes. He helped Edna down first, then Alexandra. The little girl's eyes were huge in the darkness, but she didn't cry, didn't protest. Just held her mother's hand and watched David with that unnerving wisdom that seemed too old for her small face. David lowered the panel just as he heard the front door handle rattle. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be, Alexandra." The voice was inside now. Calm, patient, professional. "I'm coming in." David moved to the front room, positioning himself between the entrance and the kitchen. His phone was already in his hand, screen glowing deliberately bright. The door opened slowly. The man in the gray jacket stepped inside, and David got his first clear look at him. Mid-40s, average height, forgettable features, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, and his posture carried the easy confidence of someone very good at violence. "You're not Alexandra," the man observed, closing the door behind him. No, David agreed. He held up his phone. But the police I just called will be very interested to know why you're breaking into a federal property. The man's smile was thin, almost pitying. Police. He took 2 steps closer. You still trust them? That's touchingly naive. This building is monitored. You're on camera right now. This building was decommissioned 3 years ago. The cameras were disconnected long before that. The man glanced around the room with professional assessment. Though I have to admit, I'm curious why she chose this location. It's not in any of her known contacts or travel history. David said nothing, his mind racing through options. The man was stalling, gathering information, which meant he wasn't entirely certain of the situation. You're the blind date, the man continued, his tone shifting to something almost conversational. David Ward, architectural consultant, 43-year-old, no criminal record, no political affiliations, no obvious connection to Alexandra Reeves. He tilted his head. Which makes me wonder, why are you helping a federal fugitive? Why are you hunting a woman and her daughter? David countered. I'm not hunting anyone. I'm retrieving stolen government property. The man's eyes hardened. Property that could compromise national security if it falls into the wrong hands. Property that Ms. Reeves stole when she fled prosecution for evidence tampering and conspiracy. That's not what happened. You've known her for what, 3 hours? And you think you understand the situation. The man took another step. She's manipulating you. It's what she does. Behavioral analyst, remember? She knows exactly which buttons to push, which story to tell to make herself seem like the victim. David felt doubt flicker. Not because he believed the man, but because the argument was logical, calculated to create uncertainty. This wasn't just muscle. This was someone trained in psychological manipulation. Where is she? The man asked quietly. Gone. Left through the back while you were monologuing. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, decision. You're lying. But that's fine. I don't need her right now. I just need what she took. He pulled out a phone, typed something quickly. You have about 6 minutes before my colleagues arrive. I suggest you use that time wisely. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. David stood frozen, listening to the footsteps fade, the car engine start, the sound of tires on pavement. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was a tactical retreat. The man was regrouping, bringing reinforcements. Or he'd planted surveillance and was waiting to see what David would do next. He's gone, David called softly toward the kitchen. The panel lifted, and Alexandra emerged first, helping Edna up. Her face was ashen. You heard? David asked. Every word. Alexandra's voice shook. He's not wrong about one thing, you barely know me. You have no reason to believe my version over his. Except that people telling the truth don't usually hunt 4-year-olds, David said flatly. Alexandra's eyes filled with tears. She sank onto the dusty sofa, pulling Edna into her lap. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The flash drive, Alexandra finally said. The evidence I took. It's not in a safe deposit box or hidden in some locker. She looked at Edna's stuffed bear, clutched tight in the girl's arms, a worn pink rabbit with button eyes. It's in there. In Mr. Hoppy. I sewed it into the lining 3 months ago. David stared at the innocent toy, realizing that this child had been carrying the weight of government corruption without even knowing it. The evidence documents everything, Alexandra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Names, dates, financial transactions. Proof that Marcus Hale has been running a trafficking operation using federal resources for over 5 years. Proof that he's been protected by people even higher up the chain. If that information goes public, it destroys them, David finished. And it paints a target on anyone who has it. Alexandra looked at him with desperate intensity. My sister, Isabel. She lives in Portland. She doesn't know anything about this, doesn't know we're running. If anything happens to me, her voice broke. Promise me. Promise me you'll make sure Edna gets to her. Promise me you'll keep her safe. The weight of that promise settled on David's shoulders like physical pressure. He thought about his carefully ordered life, his controlled world of blueprints and angles and problems that could be solved with logic. All of that seemed impossibly distant now. He knelt in front of Edna, meeting her solemn eyes. Then he looked at Alexandra. I promise, he said, but nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to figure this out. Together. Alexandra nodded, but her expression showed she'd stopped believing in happy endings months ago. Outside, in the distance, David heard sirens. The 6 minutes were up. Do you think David can really protect them? And would you trust someone you just met with your life? Let us know in the comments. Backhand index pointing down plus. Who do you think sent those coordinates? They ran. Not through the front, too obvious, but through the crawlspace David had shown them, emerging into the condemned building's basement as sirens wailed closer. David led them through corridors thick with dust and abandonment, his mental map of the district's interconnected structures guiding every turn. They surfaced 3 blocks away, blending into the pre-dawn crowd of early commuters and night shift workers heading home. Just another tired family navigating the city's indifferent morning. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, they'd crossed into a neighborhood David knew intimately, one where he'd spent 18 months overseeing a hotel renovation that had ultimately been abandoned when funding collapsed. The Riverside Grand stood like a monument to failed ambition. Its east wing remained open, limping along with budget travelers and long-term residents. But its west wing, the expansion that never happened, sat empty, locked, forgotten. David still had the contractor key code. They slipped inside through a service entrance, climbing stairs to the 3rd floor where rooms sat half-finished, walls stripped to studs, windows covered with contractor paper. It was simultaneously exposed and invisible, the kind of place no one thought to look because it seemed too obvious, too temporary. "We can't stay long," David said, checking the room he'd selected, corner position, 2 exit routes, clear sight lines to the street below. "Maybe until nightfall. Then we need to move again." But Alexandra had already collapsed onto a paint-stained tarp, Edna curled against her side. Exhaustion had finally overwhelmed adrenaline. "Just an hour," Alexandra whispered. "Please, just let us rest for an hour." David watched them, this woman and child who'd collided with his life like a meteor strike, leaving everything he knew scattered and rearranged. He should call someone. Should find a way to extract himself from this situation before it consumed him entirely. Instead, he sat against the opposite wall, keeping watch while they slept. Edna woke first, as children do, transitioning from sleep to full alertness with startling speed. She sat up, taking in the strange room with curious eyes, then spotted David still sitting guard. "You didn't sleep," she observed. "Someone had to keep watch," David replied quietly, glancing at Alexandra's sleeping form. Edna climbed to her feet, wobbling slightly, then walked over to sit beside him. She was still clutching Mr. Hoppy, unaware of the secrets sewn into his pink fabric. "Are you and Mommy friends now?" she asked. "I think so. Yes." "Good." Edna leaned against his arm with the casual trust of a child who'd decided he was safe. "Mommy needs friends. She's been sad a lot." David felt something crack in his chest. "I imagine she has. Do you like my mommy?" Edna asked, looking up at him with those 2 wise eyes. Like her?" Despite everything, the danger, the exhaustion, the impossibility of their situation, David almost laughed. "That's a very complicated question, Edna." "No, it's not. You either like someone or you don't. Adults make things more complicated than they need to be," David admitted. "But yes, I like your mommy. Why don't you smile more?" The question caught him off guard. "What? You're nice, but you don't smile a lot. Like you forgot how." Edna tilted her head. "Are you sad too?" David looked at this little girl who'd somehow seen straight through his carefully constructed armor in a way most adults never did. "Maybe a little," he said honestly. "I spend a lot of time alone, working, building things. I think I forgot how to be around people." "That's silly," Edna said matter-of-factly. "People are the best part." From across the room, Alexandra's voice, thick with sleep and emotion. "Edna, sweetheart, don't pester Mr. David." "I'm not pestering. We're talking." Edna looked between them. "Right, Mr. David?" "Right," David confirmed, meeting Alexandra's gaze over her daughter's head. Alexandra sat up slowly, running fingers through tangled hair, and for a moment she looked impossibly young, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the danger they faced and everything to do with the weight she'd been carrying alone. "You should have woken me," she said, "for watch rotation. You needed sleep more than I did. That's not how partnerships work." "Is that what this is?" David asked quietly. "A partnership?" Alexandra held his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Acknowledgement of the impossible intimacy that crisis creates, the way survival bonds strangers faster than months of normal interaction ever could. "I don't know what this is," she admitted. "But I know I haven't trusted anyone in 6 months. And I know Edna trusts you. That's..." She paused, emotion thickening her voice. "That's not nothing." Edna, clearly bored with adult conversation, had begun exploring the room, peering behind dropped cloths and into abandoned supply closets. "She likes you," Alexandra said softly, watching her daughter. "Really likes you. She hasn't responded to anyone like this since everything fell apart." "She's remarkable," David said. "Strong. Brave. You've done an incredible job protecting her through all this. Have I? Alexandra's laugh was bitter. I've made her a fugitive, taught her to be afraid of strangers, to watch for danger, to hide who she is. What kind of childhood is that? The kind where she's alive, where she's with her mother, where she still believes in kindness despite everything. David met her eyes. You haven't broken her spirit, Alexandra. That's what matters. Something shifted in Alexandra's expression, a wall lowering, just slightly. She opened her mouth to respond, but David's phone buzzed in his pocket, harsh and intrusive in the quiet room. He pulled it out, frowning. Unknown number. The message that appeared made his blood run cold. You used to build their walls. You think they won't know how to tear yours down. David's hand tightened around the phone. The implication was clear. Whoever was hunting them knew about his past, knew about his architectural work for law enforcement, knew that he understood secure facilities from the inside out, which meant they also knew how to exploit that knowledge. What is it? Alexandra asked, reading his expression. David showed her the message. He watched the color drain from her face. They know who you are now, she whispered. They're researching you, finding leverage. David, I'm so sorry. I never meant to. Stop. His voice was firm. This isn't your fault. Yes, it is. Everything I touch, her voice broke. Everyone who helps me gets hurt. Chun disappeared. The witness who was going to testify ended up dead. And now you. I made my choice, David interrupted. Nobody forced me to help. Nobody manipulated me. I saw a woman and her daughter in danger and decided to do something about it. He paused, something crystallizing in his mind. And I'm starting to realize this is bigger than one corrupt official. This isn't just Marcus Hale, is it? Alexandra looked at him with haunted eyes. No. Hale is just one piece. The trafficking network, the evidence tampering, the witness protection failures, it's systemic. Multiple agencies, multiple departments, all protecting each other. David looked toward Edna, who'd found an old contractor's hard hat and was wearing it proudly, pretending to inspect imaginary construction work. Then he looked at Alexandra, exhausted and terrified and still fighting to protect her daughter. And he understood, finally, what they were really facing. Not a manhunt. Not a rogue agent or corrupt supervisor. They were running from a machine vast, interconnected, with resources and reach that made individual resistance seem futile. But machines, David knew from years of architectural work, all had the same vulnerability. They were built by people. And anything built by people could be torn down. Get some more rest, he said quietly. Both of you. Tonight we make a new plan. A better one. What kind of plan? Alexandra asked. David looked at his phone, at the threatening message still glowing on the screen. The kind where we stop running and start building something they can't tear down. What do you think David's planning? And do you believe there's really a whole system protecting Hale? Or is Alexandra being paranoid? Drop your thoughts below. Backhand index pointing down, who would you trust in this situation? The plan took shape over cold vending machine coffee and whispered conversations while Edna napped. David had a contact, someone from his consulting days who'd moved up through federal law enforcement, someone he'd trusted with sensitive information about safe house designs and security protocols. Mitchell Torres, deputy marshal, 20-year career, impeccable record, and a reputation for doing things by the book. If anyone could provide legitimate protection while they sorted through the evidence, it would be Torres. Are you sure about this? Alexandra asked as David composed the message on a burner phone he'd picked up from a convenience store 3 blocks away. Everyone I've trusted. Torres is different, David insisted, though doubt had begun whispering at the edges of his certainty. We worked together for 5 years. He's solid. The response came within minutes. Meet me at the old Riverside Industrial Complex. Pier 17. Midnight. Come alone. I'll have a protection detail ready for your friends. David showed Alexandra the message. She read it 3 times, her tactical mind analyzing every word. Come alone, she repeated. That's standard protocol for initial contact with a potential asset. Reduces variables, minimizes risk of ambush. But, David prompted, hearing the hesitation. But it also isolates you. Makes you vulnerable. Alexandra met his eyes. If this goes wrong, then you take Edna and run. You have the flash drive. You find another way. David, promise me, Alexandra. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. I promise. But when midnight approached and they made their way through abandoned industrial streets toward the waterfront, Alexandra and Edna were hidden in the back of David's car, concealed beneath a tarp and emergency supplies. She'd refused to stay behind. I'm not letting you walk into potential danger alone, she'd said with quiet finality. We're in this together now. The Riverside Industrial Complex loomed against the night sky, a sprawling maze of warehouses and loading docks that had once serviced the city's shipping industry before containerization moved operations upriver. David had consulted on a redevelopment proposal for the site years ago. The project had died in committee, leaving the structures to decay. He knew every building, every entrance, every structural weakness. That knowledge whispered warnings as he drove slowly down the access road toward Pier 17. Too many cars. The thought crystallized as he counted vehicles in the shadowed parking area. Torres had said protection detail, maybe 3 or 4 officers. But David counted at least 8 vehicles, spread across multiple positions. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, knowing Alexandra could hear him from her hiding place. "What do you see?" Her voice was muffled but clear. "Too many people. Wrong positioning." David's architectural instincts, honed over years of designing security systems, screamed danger. If this was legitimate protective custody, they'd have clear sight lines, proper perimeter control. This is a containment formation. He stopped the car 50 yards from the warehouse entrance, leaving the engine running. A figure emerged from the shadows, not Torres. Someone younger, wearing tactical gear without insignia. No badges. No identification. David's hand moved to the gear shift. "Federal agents," the figure called out. "David Ward, exit the vehicle with your hands visible." But something was fundamentally wrong. Real federal agents identified themselves specifically. FBI, U.S. Marshals, whatever agency. They didn't just shout "federal agents" like a movie script. "It's a trap," David said, slamming the car into reverse. Gunfire shattered the night. David ducked instinctively as the rear window exploded, safety glass spraying across the back seat. He heard Alexandra's muffled cry, heard Edna's terrified whimper. "Stay down," David shouted, spinning the wheel hard. More gunfire, controlled, professional, meant to disable rather than kill. They wanted them alive. Wanted the flash drive. David's mind raced through options with the cold calculation that came from years of mapping spatial relationships and structural logistics. The warehouse complex. He'd walked every inch of it during the redevelopment assessment. There were maintenance tunnels beneath the main structures, old service corridors that connected the pier buildings to the utility stations inland. He aimed the car toward Warehouse 12, accelerating despite the bullets punching through the chassis. The building's loading bay doors hung open, rusted and abandoned. "Hold on," David yelled, and drove straight through. The car crashed through debris and abandoned pallets, finally slamming to a stop against a concrete support pillar. The impact jarred David forward, airbag deploying with violent force. "Out. Now." He kicked open his door, pulling Alexandra and Edna from the wreckage. Mr. Hoppy tumbled from Edna's grip. David grabbed it automatically, shoving it into Alexandra's hands. Behind them, footsteps and shouting. Multiple pursuers, coordinated, professional. "This way," David urged, pulling them deeper into the warehouse. His memory of the building's layout guided them through darkness, past rusted machinery, around structural columns, toward the far corner where the maintenance access had been located. His hands found the metal panel, fingers locating the release mechanism he'd noted in architectural surveys years ago. The hatch opened with a shriek of protesting metal. "Down," David commanded, helping Edna onto the ladder first, then Alexandra. Gunfire erupted again, closer now. Bullets sparked off metal, ricocheted with whining shrieks. David dropped through the hatch, pulling it closed above them just as flashlight beams swept the area. The tunnel beneath smelled of stagnant water and rust, but it was empty, and it was escape. They ran through darkness, David's phone flashlight their only guide. The tunnel connected to a storm drain system, then to an old subway service corridor that had been abandoned decades ago. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded. They emerged 30 minutes later through a maintenance grate 3 blocks from the waterfront, gasping and shaking. Alexandra collapsed against a brick wall, pulling Edna close. The little girl was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face, her breathing hitched and panicked. "They knew," Alexandra said, her voice breaking. "They knew exactly where we'd be." "How did they?" Her eyes widened, focusing on David with sudden, terrible understanding. "Your contact. Torres. He gave us up. Or Hale got to him," David said, but the words felt hollow. The betrayal sat like lead in his stomach. Mitchell Torres, who he'd trusted, who he'd worked with for years, had either been compromised or was part of the system protecting Hale all along. "They tracked us through you," Alexandra continued, her tactical mind piecing together the trap's architecture. "Through your architectural work, your connections, your blueprints. They knew you'd know these buildings. They were counting on it. David stared at his hands. Hands that had drawn plans for safe houses, designed security systems, created the very structures that were now being weaponized against them. We were never supposed to survive this, Alexandra sobbed, holding Edna tight. They're too big, too connected. We can't fight a whole system, David. We can't. Yes, we can, David interrupted, his voice hard with something new, not hope but fury. Cold, focused, architectural fury. They've been building this network for years, using people like Torres, like your supervisor Chun, protecting each other through layers of bureaucracy and fear. He looked at Alexandra, at Edna's still clutching her mother. But every system has a foundation. Every structure has a weak point. What are you saying? I'm saying if they want to use my blueprints against us, then we use them too. David's mind was already racing, already planning. I know things about their facilities they've forgotten. Weaknesses I built in deliberately. Exit strategies they don't know exist. We can't go on offense, Alexandra protested. We barely survived. Then we make sure they don't either, David finished, his voice like stone. They want to hunt us? Fine. Let's show them what it feels like to be the prey. Do you think David and Alexandra can really turn the tables? Or are they just going to get themselves killed? And who else do you think is compromised in David's network? Drop your theories. Backhand index pointing down. The cabin sat like a forgotten memory at the edge of a slate-gray lake, 2 hours north of the city through backroads David navigated from muscle memory. It had belonged to Thomas Kieran, David's mentor, the architect who'd taught him that buildings weren't just structures, but stories written in steel and stone. Thomas had died 3 years ago, leaving the cabin to David in a will that felt more like a benediction than inheritance. For when you need to remember why we build, the accompanying letter had read. David had never come here, had never been able to face the quiet, the memories, the weight of expectations he'd never quite lived up to. Now, fleeing through pre-dawn darkness with a woman and child who'd become his entire world in 72 impossible hours, the cabin felt like the only place left that made sense. They arrived as sunrise painted the lake in shades of copper and ash. Edna had finally fallen into exhausted sleep in Alexandra's arms, her face pressed against her mother's shoulder. Mr. Hoppy clutched tight. It's safe here, David said quietly, unlocking the door. Off-grid. No digital footprint. Thomas was paranoid about privacy. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and thyme. Furniture covered in dust sheets, bookshelves lined with architectural journals and philosophical texts Thomas had loved. David had kept the utilities running, some part of him unable to let go completely. Alexandra laid Edna on the couch, covering her with a wool blanket she found in a chest. Then she pulled Mr. Hoppy from her bag, her hands trembling as she examined the worn stuffed rabbit that carried the weight of everything they'd been running from. I need to see it, she said. I need to know if what we've been through is worth it. David found Thomas's old laptop, ancient but functional and crucially, never connected to any network that could be traced. While Alexandra carefully opened the seam in Mr. Hoppy's back, extracting the flash drive with the delicate precision of someone defusing a bomb, David booted up the machine. The flash drive contained 63 files. Alexandra opened them methodically, her face growing paler with each document. David read over her shoulder, his architect's mind struggling to process the bureaucratic horror laid out in spreadsheets and case reports. Names, dates, psychological profiles used not to help victims, but to identify vulnerabilities. Government contracts routing money through shell corporations. Evidence logs showing items that disappeared, testimonies that were altered, witnesses who'd been relocated and never seen again. And at the center of it all, Marcus Hale and a network of officials spanning 3 federal agencies. They used behavioral analysis to select victims, Alexandra whispered, her voice hollow with horror. People who wouldn't be missed, who had trauma histories that made them seem unreliable, who could be discredited if they came forward. They profiled them like we profile criminals, but they were hunting prey, not justice. One document made David's stomach turn, a psychological evaluation of a 12-year-old girl, marked with clinical notes about compliance factors and manipulation vulnerability. This is systematic, David said. This isn't corruption, it's industrialized exploitation. And I helped build the methodology they're using. Alexandra's voice cracked. I taught some of these techniques. I wrote papers on vulnerability assessment that they're applying to. She couldn't finish. You couldn't have known. That doesn't make the victims less hurt, less destroyed. She looked at him with devastated eyes. How do we make this right, David? How do we fix what I helped create? We expose it. All of it. David's mind was already working through logistics. I know a journalist. Sarah Chun, no relation to your supervisor. investigative reporter, specializes in government accountability. She's published classified leaks before. If we can get this to her, they'll kill her, Alexandra interrupted. The moment she starts asking questions, they'll know. They'll disappear her like they disappeared David Chun, like they've disappeared everyone who's gotten close. So we make it public before they can react. Simultaneous release to multiple outlets. Make it too big to contain. Alexandra stared at the screen, at the evidence that could bring down an empire built on suffering. I should deliver it myself. Meet with her in person. Make sure she understands the context, the connections. Absolutely not, David said immediately. You're a fugitive with a target on your back. The moment you surface, they already know where we are. They've been tracking us through you, remember? Alexandra's voice hardened with determination. And I'm the only one who can authenticate this evidence. I'm the analyst who helped build the system. My testimony gives it credibility and makes you a perfect target. I'm already a target. Alexandra stood abruptly, pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. David, I've been running for 6 months. 6 months of hiding, of looking over my shoulder, of teaching my daughter that the world is full of people who want to hurt us. I can't, her voice broke. I can't keep living like this, waiting for them to find us, waiting for the moment they take her from me. So you're just going to walk into danger? Sacrifice yourself. I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning, fight back. She turned on him, eyes blazing. You keep saving us like it's your job, like we're some project you need to solve, some building you need to design. But I'm not a blueprint, David. I'm a person, and I need. She stopped, emotion choking her words. What? David asked quietly. What do you need? I need someone who stays even when it's not their job anymore, Alexandra whispered. Someone who doesn't just protect us from danger, but chooses us after the danger passes. Someone who, she looked away, tears streaming down her face. I need to know that when this is over, if we survive, you're not just going to go back to your ordered life and forget we existed. The words hit David like a physical blow. Because beneath the tactical planning and survival instinct, something had shifted between them. Something neither had acknowledged, because acknowledging it meant admitting they might not survive to explore what it meant. You think I could forget you? David crossed the room, his hands finding hers. Alexandra, I've spent 10 years hiding behind blueprints and safety protocols because I was too afraid to let anyone close enough to matter. And then you walked into my life, crashed into my life, and suddenly the only thing I can think about is keeping you safe. Both of you. That's not the same as. I'm not doing this because it's my job, David interrupted. I'm doing it because somewhere between a blind date and a gunfight, you became the person I can't imagine losing. Alexandra stared at him, something raw and vulnerable in her expression. Then she kissed him, desperate and fierce and tasting of tears and hope and terror all mixed together. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead against his. I have to do this, she whispered. I have to be the one who delivers the evidence. Please understand. Then I'm coming with you. No. Edna needs someone. If this goes wrong, if they catch me, she needs you to keep your promise. To get her to my sister. Alexandra pulled back, her decision made. Stay with her. Protect her. That's how you save us both. David wanted to argue, wanted to lock the door, and refused to let her leave. But he saw the steel in her eyes, the same determination that had kept her running for 6 months, that had protected her daughter through impossible odds. When? He asked. Tomorrow. Sarah Chun works out of the city. I'll call her tonight, set up the meeting. Alexandra glanced toward Edna, still sleeping peacefully. One more night. Let me have one more night with her before I go. They spent the evening in careful normalcy, cooking dinner from canned supplies in Thomas's pantry, playing cards with a worn deck David found in a drawer, reading to Edna from children's books left over from when Thomas's grandchildren visited. David watched Alexandra memorize her daughter's face, the way she laughed, the questions she asked, the warmth of her small body pressed close during the bedtime story. When Edna finally slept, Alexandra and David sat by the fireplace, not speaking, just existing in the temporary peace of the cabin's isolation. David woke at dawn to find Alexandra's side of the couch empty. On the table, weighted down by Mr. Hoppy, now empty of his dangerous cargo, lay a note in Alexandra's careful handwriting. David, I couldn't say goodbye. Couldn't look at Edna's face and leave anyway. So I'm doing it like this, like a coward. The flash drive is in the old coffee tin above the sink. Sarah Chun knows I'm coming. If you don't hear from me by noon, get Edna out. Get her to Portland. My sister's address is on the back of this note. Thank you for staying when you didn't have to. Thank you for showing Edna that good people still exist. Thank you for making me believe, even for a moment, that we could have something more than survival. For Edna. For you. For everyone they've hurt. I have to end this. David stared at the note, at the empty cabin, at Edna still sleeping peacefully on the couch, unaware that her mother had walked into danger alone. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text message. She's walking into a trap. Noon. Riverside Park. Come alone if you want to save her. A friend. Will David leave Edna to save Alexandra? Or stay and keep his promise? What would you do? And who do you think sent that warning message? Friend or enemy? Tell us in the comments. David stared at the message, his mind fracturing between impossible choices. Leave Edna alone and unprotected. Or let Alexandra walk into an ambush without warning. He looked at the little girl sleeping peacefully on the couch, clutching the empty Mr. Hoppy. Then at the note in Alexandra's handwriting, her final request. Keep Edna safe. His hands were shaking as he made the call. Not to rush toward danger, but to someone who could reach Alexandra faster than he could. Sarah Chin answered on the second ring. Change of location, David said without preamble. It's compromised. Tell Alexandra, Riverside Park is a trap. There was a pause. Then, she's already there. Left 20 minutes ago. David, what's happening? But David had already hung up, already dialing emergency services, already breaking every protocol about staying hidden because Alexandra's life was worth more than secrecy. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, trapped in the cabin with a sleeping child and desperate fear, was that Alexandra had never intended to go alone. Sarah Chin had brought backup. Real backup. Federal prosecutors who'd been building parallel cases, journalists with deadlines already set, protection details that answered to people outside Hale's network. And Alexandra, walking into Riverside Park with the flash drive and 6 months of fury, had finally found allies who believed her. The gunfight that erupted lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, 3 of Hale's operatives were in custody, 2 were dead, and Alexandra was alive, bleeding from a grazing wound to her shoulder but alive. The story broke that evening across every major network. 3 months later, David stood at the window of the small apartment he'd rented under his mother's maiden name, watching Edna draw at the kitchen table. She was working on a picture of a house, not the kind with multiple locks she'd drawn in the cafe, but something different. Something with windows full of light and a garden out front. Is this one good? She asked, holding it up. It's perfect, David said, and meant it. They'd settled into a rhythm over the past months, a strange, improvised family built from crisis and promise. David had kept his word, protecting Edna while the investigation exploded across the federal government. But he'd done more than protect. He'd stayed, enrolled her in school, learned to braid hair, figured out how to explain that her mother was doing something incredibly brave and might not come back. The news played constantly in those first weeks. Marcus Hale arrested. Federal task force formed. Congressional hearings scheduled. Dozens of officials implicated. A trafficking network spanning 5 years and 3 agencies, finally exposed. But Alexandra's name never appeared. She'd been designated a protected witness, her identity sealed, her testimony given behind closed doors. David had received one message, weeks after Riverside Park. She's safe. In protective custody. She can't contact you yet. SC. And then silence. Months of silence that taught David what Alexandra had lived with for half a year. The not knowing, the waiting, the terrible space between hope and grief. Mr. David? Edna's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Can we go to the cafe tonight? The one where I met you. David's heart clenched. They'd avoided the Lantern Cafe deliberately, afraid that returning to where it all began might be dangerous, might draw attention. But the case was closed now. Hale was awaiting trial. The network was shattered. Maybe it was finally safe to go back. Sure, sweetheart, David said. Let's go to the cafe. The Lantern Cafe looked exactly as it had that impossible night. Warm lights against evening darkness, the hum of conversation, the smell of coffee and comfort. But everything felt different now. The danger had been replaced by absence, the fear by a deeper ache. Edna held David's hand as they entered, her eyes scanning the room with the instinctive caution she'd learned too young. Then she froze. Mr. David, she whispered, her voice carrying something between wonder and disbelief. Look. She was pointing toward the corner table. Their table, where a little girl had once delivered her mother's message to a stranger. A woman sat there alone, backlit by the window, her silhouette familiar but impossible. Mommy's sorry she's late, Edna breathed, and then she was running, small feet pounding across the cafe floor, weaving between tables exactly as she had 3 months ago. David couldn't move, couldn't breathe. couldn't process what he was seeing. Alexandra stood as Edna crashed into her, lifting her daughter with a sob that carried 3 months of separation and survival. Her face was thinner, marked by exhaustion and testimony and the weight of bringing down an empire. But she was alive. She was here. She was looking at David over Edna's shoulder, tears streaming down her face. David crossed the cafe on legs that felt disconnected from his body. When he reached them, Alexandra was laughing and crying simultaneously, holding Edna with one arm and reaching for him with the other. "You came back," David said, the words inadequate for the magnitude of relief flooding through him. "I promised I would," Alexandra replied. "It just took longer than I thought." They sat at the corner table, the same table where this had all begun with a whisper and a warning. A waiter brought menus, placed a candle between them with practiced efficiency, unaware that this simple gesture carried the weight of everything they'd survived. "Tell me," David said quietly, while Edna colored on a napkin, oblivious to the enormity of her mother's return. "Tell me everything." So Alexandra did. Told him about the testimony that lasted weeks, the protective custody that felt like a different kind of prison, the moment the prosecutor had finally said she was free to leave. Told him about the plea deals and arrests, about David Chun found alive in a safe house, about the network that was still being dismantled one corrupt official at a time. "And Hale?" David asked. "Awaiting trial. But between my testimony, Chen's evidence, and what we provided," she glanced at Edna, then back to David, "he'll never see the outside of a prison again." "You did it," David said. "You actually did it. We did it." Alexandra's hand found his across the table. "I couldn't have survived without knowing you were keeping her safe. Without knowing." She paused, emotion thickening her voice. "Without knowing you were keeping the promise you made." "I told you I would stay," David said, "even when it wasn't my job anymore." "Is that what this still is?" Alexandra asked quietly. "A job." David looked at Edna, happily drawing between them. Then at Alexandra, exhausted and beautiful and impossibly present. Then at the candle flickering between them. The same kind of candle that had once hidden coordinates, that had marked the beginning of their collision. "No," he said. "This stopped being a job the moment I realized I couldn't imagine a life without both of you in it." Alexandra's breath caught. "David, I know it's complicated. I know we built this on crisis and survival and circumstances that weren't exactly normal." He squeezed her hand. "But I also know that over the past 3 months, raising Edna, building something that felt like family, I've never been happier. Never felt more complete." "Mommy," Edna interrupted, looking up from her drawing with the perfect timing only children possess. "Mr. David makes really good pancakes now. And he learned to do the special braid you do. And he reads the voices in stories just like you." Alexandra laughed, a sound full of joy and relief and something deeper. "Does he? And I think you should marry him," Edna added matter-of-factly, returning to her coloring. "Because Mrs. Henderson next door was right. You did need to find a husband. And Mr. David is nice." And he stayed. David felt his face flush. "Edna, that's not." "She's not wrong," Alexandra interrupted, her eyes bright with tears and laughter. "About the staying part, anyway." They sat there as evening deepened into night. 3 people who'd found each other through danger and fear, and a little girl's whispered warning. Around them, the cafe buzzed with ordinary life. First dates and business meetings and friends catching up over coffee. But at their corner table, under the flickering candlelight, something extraordinary had been rebuilt from impossible circumstances. "So what now?" David asked. Alexandra looked at their hands, intertwined on the table. Then at Edna, who'd fallen asleep against her mother's side, finally at peace. Then at David, who'd kept his promise and stayed when he didn't have to. "Now." Alexandra smiled, a real smile, full and unguarded, the kind she hadn't been able to manage in months. "Now we build something new. Something that isn't just survival. Something that's actually a life." The candle between them flickered and held, its small flame refusing to go out despite the draft from the door, despite the impossibility of everything that had led them here. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive on time. Sometimes it shows up late, carrying danger, truth, and the one person you were meant to protect all along. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to stay when every instinct tells you to run, it becomes the strongest structure you'll ever build. Not because it's easy, but because it's worth it.
Thanks so much for watching till the end. If this story moved you, you're going to love what's coming next. It's even more surprising and emotional than this one. Go ahead and click the story on your screen right now, and see you in the next story.